So the most common casting mistake I've seen on the bank is getting the drop wrong. When I'm talking about the drop, I'm talking about the distance that the lead is from the tip of the rod. The optimum length of the drop is approximately 50% of the length of the fishing rod that you're using. For a 9-foot rod, it should be 4.5 foot. To put this into real numbers, I'm going to give you a demonstration. I'm going to be using one of my 9-foot scopes. So a 9-foot scope is 273 centimeters long. So half of that is 135.5 centimeters. I'm using 80 centimeters of leader, so that leaves half a meter of distance from the tip ring to the top of the leader is going to put me around the 50% mark. While 50% might be the optimum number, sometimes going a little shorter can actually gain us a bit more accuracy. But if you go too short, the lead won't be going in a big enough arc, and if you go way too long, you're either going to be banging the lead on the ground or you won't have the distance through the arc of the cast in order to accelerate the lead. If you want to achieve maximum distance, then the closer to 50% of the rod's length that you are, the more power you're going to be able to generate. In most of my work, accuracy is more important than distance, so I tend to shorten that off by 10 to 15 centimeters from wherever the 50% of the rod length position is. I've just set my marker rod up at 40 meters or 11 wraps, and I'm going to set the fishing rod to the same distance, and we'll see how we do on the accuracy at that kind of range. So we know from the measurements on the bench there that the 50% mark is exactly there. So when the lead is there, that's exactly 50%. So that lead can be anything from there up to about there in terms of the drop. So at this point we're going to get maximum distance. Up here is going to be more accurate. So 80 centimeters a leader, that would be far too short a drop, and you'd have the knot going through the tip ring there, so you absolutely do not want to cast with a leader in that position. So on this setup, this distance here is the shortest that I want this lead to be. So obviously I'm not going to get a measuring tape out every time and measure these distances. Once I understand the geometry of the rod and the leader, etc., I can just make mental note of this, and then I use visual references, so I can just look at the rod tip, look at where the top of the leader is, and I can just eyeball it. I know what the shortest point is, I know what the longest point is, and I can just make a judgment for the cast that I want to achieve, either maximum accuracy or maximum distance, make a call, okay, yeah, that's just about right there, and we can go from there. Once we've set the drop right, we need to get the position of the bail arm right. So here we can see that the bail arm is in this position and the line is exiting at this angle here, but my finger is up here. Now I've got two choices here. I can either rotate it round to there, and that's going to shorten the drop fractionally, or I can take off the anti-reverse and rotate it from there around to there. You've got to get the roller of the bail arm around to this point here. It's no good going to there, opening the bail arm there, and you're just not going to be able to control the line. So just rotate the bail arm round to the position of your finger, set the anti-reverse there, take the line, and then open the bail arm from that position there. That's the safest position for that bail arm to be during the cast. Once we've set the bail arm position here, if we go back to the rod and just offer up the lead, we go from the butt ring there up to the spigot, not too short but not too long. It's just about halfway in between there. So that's a really nice position to make this cast from. The next thing we need to get right is the position of our finger on the line. If we wrap too much finger around there, the chances are when we release the line, you're going to get a kind of double twang. It'll release from there, but it will catch there, and it might catch again there. So the position I go for is right in the middle of the tip of my index finger. That way it's going to be a nice clean release. Next we need to maintain the proper form in this finger. It's no good having that finger elongated there, because as the power comes on the cast, the line might slip off the finger. You can bring it all the way up to there to hold it against the rod, but that's an awkward position to hold your finger in. So I tend to hold it just about there. That means I can hold the rod securely and firmly there, but control the line when the power comes on the cast. The next thing we need to look at is how we actually hold the rod. So my preferred hand position is this. If you want to get the absolute maximum distance, a tournament caster will teach you to hold the rod there. This feels very awkward for me, so that doesn't suit me. And it's only going to make about a 10-15 difference between the hand position anyway, so for me, there's no real gain. Some anglers might prefer to hold the rod like that, but the further the hand position is towards the butt, the further this finger is away from the reel. If I exaggerate that, if I put my hand down there, then it's really hard to hold the line and the finger's not going to get anywhere near that spool lip. Means it's going to be impossible for me to do my feathering and my trapping as I do with my one finger. And this is another reason why this hand position really works for me, because I've just got in the habit of being able to control the cast with one hand and to trap the line with one hand. I simply don't need to use my second hand in order to control the rig in flight. The next thing we need to get right is the position of our feet. Now, if we're doing a short little cast, it's okay to have your feet kind of square on, pointing directly at the target. But if you want a bit more kind of stability and a bit more power in the cast, then open out the stance and kind of have the feet at 45 degrees to the angle that you're going to cast at. The next thing to get right is the position of your left hand for a right-handed caster. So we've got the end of the rod here. This is an abbreviated rod handle design. This portion of the handle is where you're meant to hold the rod. It's no good holding the rod up here because you're not going to get any power in the cast. For maximum power, what I tend to do is I take my little finger and I just put it actually at the bottom of the butt cap, like that. So that means that my hand is optimally positioned right at the end of the rod to get maximum leverage. The next thing we need to nail is the position of our arms. The left arm should be nice and extended and straight. It's no good having a bent left arm. The right arm also needs to be extended. It's okay for accuracy to have it a little bit softer, but for maximum distance that right arm needs to be fully extended. One of the most common mistakes I see from anglers is having a soft right arm, and the rod actually kind of ends up very, very close to the head there. You're not going to get any power in the cast because what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and punch forward with the right hand and not pull enough with the left hand. All of the power in the cast comes from the left hand. We don't want that soft, we want that like that for maximum power. If you want good accuracy, then if you start from the rod from about this position, then that's going to work well for you. For maximum distance, you need to extend that left arm long, keep the right arm long as well, and at that point there, the lead is just kissing the ground there. I can feel it bang. And if we make the cast from this point, we will get the maximum power in the cast. But we're pulling with this hand and we're just extending a little bit more with this hand. We're not going to try and do that because that's not going to work. So for an accurate cast, I would start at this point here. For maximum distance, I want to rotate the rod back and just kiss the lead on the ground from that point there. But I'm still keeping my right arm nice and long and straight. If you want the line to flow off the spool smoothly, then we need to add a bit of lubrication. It's quite warm at the moment and that line's dried out, so I'm just going to splash some water. You don't want to submerge the reel because that's not going to do it any good, but fine just to splash some water on like that. You can also dip the rings to make sure that they're properly lubricated as well. So I've popped my marker up at 40 meters, so this is going to be, quite a short cast. So I'm not looking for distance here, I'm looking for accuracy at this kind of range. So to make this cast, I'm not going to bring the rod all the way back, and also my right arm is going to be a little softer than it would be for a full-blooded distance cast. The other thing you need to do before you make a cast, especially on a front drag reel, is you need to lock up the clutch, because at that the clutch is completely loose, that fully locked up, and if that slips the line is going to cut your finger, so always lock up that spool before casting. The next thing to focus on is getting that rod to go through a straight vertical line. If the rod goes from left to right or right to left, that is the direction the lead is going to travel. So the lead is never going to go where you want it to go if you're not pushing the rod through and drawing the rod through in a straight line. So it needs to be going vertically straight, and then in a forward direction it needs to be going straight as well. The next part of the casting action is probably the trickiest to master, and that's getting the release point right. We must stop the rod. Yeah, we're going to be moving the rod, but if we don't stop the rod, then we're not going to transfer the energy into the lead. So there's no follow through in a cast. If you're making a cast and you're releasing the lead and then you're still moving the rod, then you've released too early. The perfect release position for the rod is at 45 degrees. That's going to give us the maximum distance for the given input of force that we deliver. So our starting position is here. I'm then going to pull down with my left while extending the right, and my left hand finishes in the middle of the chest, and then the rod finishes at a 45 degree angle. My right arm finishes in a fully extended position like this. So if your cast looks like this, and your release point is there but the rod tip continues on, then you've released too soon and you've forgotten to stop the rod. So if we've got everything right up to now, we've got our hands in the right position, our arms are in the right position, they're moving in the right way, we're driving the rod with our left hand, taking the rod through to 45 degrees and stopping, then it's all about that release point. If we let go a little bit too late, what's going to happen is that lead is going to go on a low trajectory. We're just kind of twang it basically. It doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel good, and we're not going to get the distance that we expected to, given the amount of energy that we put into the cast. If we bottle out on the release point and we release just before the kind of 45 position, the finish position, then we're going to sky the lead. The lead is going to travel in too high a trajectory, it's going to go up too far, and it's going to fall short of the target. There is no magic formula or no magic way that I can tell you of when to release it. It takes hundreds, thousands of casts. It's just practice, muscle memory, and just do it and do it and do it and do it, and you will start to get a feel for it. Once you've got all the basics right, you might want to learn to cast a little bit further. To cast further, it's all about hand speed. If your hands are moving too slowly, then you're not going to get the tip of the rod to travel fast. And if the rod tip's not travelling fast, the lead is not going to travel fast, and it's not going to go very far. So the limiting factor in terms of how far you can cast is simply going to be the question of how fast you can move your left hand from the extended position into your chest. So if you want to cast further, you can practice this at home. Extend your left hand like that and just bring it into your chest like that. The faster you can do that, the further you're going to be able to cast. Now, I've fished alongside some anglers that have got phenomenal hand speed. They can literally cast off their knees and smack it 160, 170 yards. Phenomenal skill. For most mere mortals like myself, in order to get those kind of distances, you're going to have to get some body weight into the cast as well. Now, doing that is really next level, and the best advice I can give you is if you've got to a certain level where maybe you can hit 120 yards or something, but you want to hit 140, 150 or beyond that, then you're going to have to work with a professional casting coach. To get the best out of your casting technique, you need to choose a lead and a mainline that are going to work in harmony together. It's no good deciding to pair a 1 ounce lead with thick 0.45 mainline if you need to cast 100 yards. That ain't happening. Generally speaking, a heavier lead will cast further because they have more momentum and are able to tow the mainline and the rig further out into the lake. If I wanted to cast a rig up to about 80 yards and the lake was relatively snag free with a clean bottom, I'd probably use a 2.5 ounce lead and 0.3 diameter mainline. Because I'm using a running lead system, I don't need to use a heavier lead because I'm not using the weight of the lead to hook the carp. In terms of style, I'd usually opt for an aerodynamic shape. Something like an inline distance or a swivel distance would be perfect for this type of work. If I only needed to cast 50 yards, I'd probably go for a simple super flat inline in 2.5 ounce. This shape of lead will fall slower through the water. It means they're perfectly suited for sitting softly onto the silt. Because 0.30 mono is robust enough to absorb the casting force of a 2 ounce lead, I don't need to use a leader even to get distances of 80 yards or so. If I do need to use 0.45 mono, just because of the nature of where I'm fishing, then I'd always opt for a fairly heavy lead. About 3.5 ounce works for me. Even with a 3.5 ounce lead, I still won't be able to cast that setup very far. So if I needed to fish in excess of about 80 yards, I'd probably opt to row those rigs out. For maximum range, I'd use a thinner mainline. 0.28 mainline will cast a very long way, but of course I need to add a shock leader on top of that, otherwise it will just break when I cast it. In terms of lead size, I'd go with a 3.5 ounce or maybe a 4 ounce, and for shape I'd always go with a tournament style or a distance style lead, because these leads are aerodynamic enough to cast a very long way, and they also have the mass. What if you cast too far or too short? Learning to cast just hard enough to perfectly kiss the clip and land the rig on the water time after time takes practice. It takes years of practice. But while you're working on your technique, how do you overcome casts that are falling too short? If you know that the cast is falling short, what I would do is I would bail out of that cast. If you think about it for too long, the lead is falling through the water and it's hit the bottom. If that rig hits the bottom, and especially if you're fishing over gravel, the chances are that if you then decide, okay, well it's fallen too short, I'm going to wind back in and have another go. If you're lifting that rig off the bottom, you're going to dink the hook on the retrieve anyway. And if you dink the hook, you've ruined your chances. So to avoid this situation, what I would do is, if you realise the cast is falling short, just bail out. Close the bail arm even when the lead's in flight. You won't break the line, you won't damage the rod. Close your bail arm, start winding, get that rig back in and have another go. If you cast too hard but you're tracking that rig in flight, then you always have the option to apply a little bit of feathering to decelerate the lead. This will slow the speed of the lead in flight so that when it arrives at the clip, it'll kiss it rather than slam into it. If you're constantly slamming into the clip, you're just going to get a massive amount of bounce back, and you'll get a big variation in the distance at which your lead actually ends up fishing. Because casting just hard enough is a difficult thing to judge, even when you've made those 10,000 casts, by casting just that little bit harder and then applying a little deceleration to the lead, it gives you more margin for error, and this will help you to get it right more often than not. If you really are struggling to cast with any kind of accuracy and consistency, you could always just cheat, and by cheat I mean use a solid PVA bag, because with a solid PVA bag it doesn't matter how bad the cast is, your rig will be well presented. As long as you've built the bag right in the first place, and as long as it's in the water vaguely in the area where the carp might visit, then you stand a good chance. The only downside with using a solid PVA bag is if you really do mess up the cast, you're going to have to wind it back in and you are going to have to tie on a new bag. Does the elasticity of mono affect casting accuracy? If you found a spot with your marker rod and your marker rod is set up with braid and you want to transfer that distance onto your fishing rod, and your fishing rod is set up with mono, do you have to allow for this? Because we've got a difference between the elasticity of braid and the elasticity of mono. Basically, braid has no stretch, and mono, well, it's just a giant elastic band. Despite the difference in elasticity between mono and braid, I will always set my fishing rod to exactly the same distance as my marker rod. Even though I know when I make the cast with the mono, when it hits the clip, the lead is travelling further than the distance that my marker rod lead will travel. But as the lead is swinging down through the water, the tension is coming out of that mono. So by the time the lead hits the lake bed, there shouldn't be any difference between the impact point of a lead that swung down on braid and a lead that is swung down on mono, because the lead on the mono rig arrives in an unstretched state. If you're still not convinced of this, it's pretty easy to see for yourself. All you need is a couple of pop-ups, and you tie one pop-up using PVA tape to the lead on your marker rod and another pop-up with PVA tape to your fishing rod. Make 2 casts, ideally along a margin, and have the help of a friend that can see the impact position clearly of these 2 leads. Start off with the marker rod first, cast it in, lead will hit the bottom, and after a few seconds the pop-up is going to pop up to the surface. Your mate can then eyeball where that pop-up is relative in distance to you. You can then do exactly the same with your fishing rod. You need to make these casts very similar, because if there's any errors in casting, obviously there's going to be a big difference in terms of where the pop-up is going to arrive. But if the 2 casts are pretty similar, then the 2 pop-ups are going to float up to the surface in a very similar point.